Now it's time for a review of what's making the headlines in the papers this morning. Dr. Constance Ikoku, over to you.
Good morning, Yolanda.
Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Constance.
Good morning, Benga.
It's always a delight to have two wonderful geniuses to blaze the
Oh,
news
Benga, thank you.
Okay, I claim it.
That's very nice of you this morning.
That's quite modest of you. But you know you're a genius.
Oh, Lord. How was your weekend?
Oh, cool.
Let's move from genius to weekend talk. I hope you all had a good time.
It was a restful
Jolly
one.
time
And
indeed.
yours, Dr. Constance?
It was
Jolly
okay.
time indeed.
So. All right, let's look at those stories that are shaping the agenda for you today. We'll kick off with this day newspaper. When we look across the papers today, a major narrative is political disputes of national and state levels, especially within the largest parties, that is shaping perceptions ahead of 2027. So continued EFCC legal actions against top figures remain top news, highlighting governance and accountability debates. Some titles are flagging reports on new tax regimes expected in 2026 and how they could affect ordinary Nigerians, and regional security with ECOWAS also made the headlines today. So this day has gone with the opposition alleging a plan by the government to impose a one-party state. That has been a talk for some time now. And Dangote and the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority Agency, CEO, on each other's throat, with the African richest man demanding a probe of the CEO on grounds of sabotage. And the FIRS and French MOU on taxation is raising dust. Here, the government is defending the agreement and saying that the taxpayer data will not be compromised. Leadership newspaper leads with the meeting of heads of states of Economic Community of West African States in Abuja, in which they spoke against coups, violent extremism, and called for unity. Daily Independent writes about the FIRS France tax MOU, which northern leaders have called a threat to national security. And as the year comes to a close, Nigerian banks are on high alert over digital fraud increase. New Telegraph says Nigeria has the highest rate of grounded aircraft in the world. In Bayelsa State, Governor Diri is seeking an autopsy following the death of Deputy Governor Erujakbo. A federal government banks admission, a transfer of students into SS3 to curb exam malpractice. And more investigations of corruption by ICPC and the Conduct Bureau. On the economy, Nigeria exports to African countries has risen 37%, and the country has also recorded 3.6 trillion naira from global cocoa sales. The Punch newspaper reflects on car imports and how it has hit 1 trillion naira in 9 months. Vanguard turns attention to allegations by known terrorist Tuji Bello that 2 former governors are fueling insecurity. And Governor Agbukefas of Taraba State finally crossing over to the APC and has received his membership card. Abuja Inquirer shines light on the 11 Nigerian troops and the aircraft that was seized in Burkina Faso, whose fate is still unclear 8 days after. The Guardian reports on corruption trials under former President Muhammadu Buhari's government, with the ex-Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele and ex-ministers facing 3.5 trillion naira graft probe. To the international headlines, we have this morning Sydney Morning Herald that shows the deadly attack at the Hanukkah celebration on Bondi Beach, Sydney. At least 15 to 16 people killed and many injured. A suspect has been detained and questions over motive and security issues are being probed. We have this morning also, the Guardian newspaper frames the same story as an international hate attack with urgent implications for Jewish communities and for Australia's counter-terror posture. Similarly, in the Times, the Bondi Beach mass shooting dominates the front page coverage, plus the usual comment cartoons on current politics. We move on to the Mail. The Mail, Daily Mail, combines human interest heroism with alarmist security framing, using the incident to spotlight both individual bravery and government calls for increased preparedness. Daily Express highlights the bystander intervention that helped stop the attack. Daily Mirror focuses on human cause and community solidarity, with headline aiming at empathy and cause for vigilance against hate. In Financial Times front page, international markets and big-ticket businesses moves share space with coverage of the Bondi atrocity. The Sun newspaper takes the angle of sensational human drama and national outrage on the same Bondi incident. The Independent calls it an act of evil, while Metro.co.uk uses brief commuter-friendly style to communicate the scale of the tragedy and calls for solidarity. Globally, in general, reports of deadly drone attacks on a UN peacekeeping base in Sudan have intensified concerns about escalating violence, and oil markets climbed amid fears of supply disruption linked to escalating tensions between the United States and Venezuela. Now, let's break down what these stories mean for everyday people. Let's return to this day newspaper. So you have that lead story talking about allegations against the government that is trying to impose one-party state on Nigeria. And let's pair that with the other story about Governor of Taraba State, Abu Kefas, now formally registering with the APC. He has already received his membership ticket card, rather.
Actually, it leaves a deep concern on the state of our polity and democracy under the current watch of this dispensation. We wonder what happens to the politics of ideology during the time of the First Republic. You see the Action Group, you see the ruling party. They have their different strong hardline ideology, and they are proud of it. But now it seems it's a race of political survival. That's what is defining the momentum now, and you also see the race for their political future. It was just I love the way the writers put it, that it's one of the worst kept secret, just waiting for time to manifest itself before the Taraba State, and I think one or two more governors might also be defecting. So it indicates a landmine in the nation's democratic landscape, and I think that stakeholders and our leaders should prevent the country from slipping into what is called a one-party state, because that would make a mockery of our democracy. But then the opposition parties should learn to play the politics of opposition in a fair and square way. They should rise up, because this is not the first time that some parties were falling into opposition, but they stood by their ideological differences, by their ideological standpoint, and they maintained their stand, and with time they were able to fight over and claim power. But now it leaves a lot of political uncertainty on Nigeria's democratic landscape, and it would kind of undermine the credibility of 2027 election and the forthcoming elections in 2026.
Did you have anything to say on that?
I did want to add to that and say that, you know, several members of the Taraba State House of Assembly had also defected recently. So I was wondering if, you know, are we crying over spilt milk already? You know, is this not something that we are already in a deep, you know, because you're saying it as if it's something to anticipate.
You know, the governor's movement is highly symbolic. Once the government moves, the structure moves along with it expectedly.
So, I mean, there's certainly ongoing alignments and realignments across the country, and which gives people access to the center, which is what they're saying, essentially. Well, why the APC has been celebrating all of these movements with big fanfare and parties, and there's an angle that is not widely reported, which is a possible implosion of the APC itself. So we have all these governors, we have other, you know, politicians, we have the state houses of assembly, and other politicians in generally moving in mass, in drove to the APC. As those movements are happening, you have the governors insisting that they want to take charge of the state party structure in each state. Apart from that, you also have those members of the national state houses of assembly who also want a ticket to come back automatically. So what happens to those that are already in the party who feel like they are being shoved aside, who feel like newcomers are coming in. They're not queuing up. They're not queuing up. They're jumping the queue to go ahead of them. So this is an area that we're not looking at what is going to happen. You know,
no doubt the political horse trading and bidding will become very intense ahead of the forthcoming election with the situation of things right now.
I mean, you know, on the other hand, you also have, what about the voters? You know, the voters both on the side of the PDP and the APC. I think there's a lot of cynicism that is going on because of all of this. What is going to happen? Will there be voter apathy? Probably. And people saying, what's the point of all of this? Do we have politicians that are working for our interests or they're working for themselves? So that's also an angle we have to look at, you know, eventually. And to the PDP, you know, licking his wounds and trying to resurrect the party. We saw the chairman, Dr. Tanimu Aturaki, was in Ogun State last weekend with a couple of other members of the National Working Committee visiting former President Olusegun Obasanjo. And at that meeting, or after that meeting, saying that they believe they have what it takes to dislodge the APC in 2027. Again, you know, we can't say, but you see, they are trying to see what they can do to make sure that they have their own.
I want to say that the PDP is in an intensive care state, merely waiting for an undertaker.
Let's take another story in this day newspaper on the FIRS French MOU on taxation raising dust. You know, since last week when we saw that story. Now the government is defending that agreement and says taxpayer data will not be compromised. New Telegraph has a little more on that. It's saying here in New Telegraph that Northern Elders Forum are demanding immediate halt to that agreement. And the African Democratic Congress wants full disclosure of everything. So this memorandum of understanding is raising a lot of questions. The MOU was reported as efforts to modernize Nigeria's tax system. But some say sharing sensitive data with a foreign country may infringe on national security. Demands are being made for a proper briefing to the National Assembly and an independent assessment of the implications of this MOU on data security, cybersecurity, and national sovereignty. The African Democratic Congress says France's influence and motives are openly questioned across West Africa. And so why is Nigeria doing this? So I'm going to quote them. They said, yet under the Bola Tinubu administration, Nigeria appears to have become more Francophone than the French. So are we effectively outsourcing sensitive data policy to France? The federal government says no. But I doubt if this is going to put a lead on this.
I'm with you on this one, Dr. Constance. I think this ongoing debate about this MOU is very valid and should not be taken lightly at all. I think people deserve to know the details of what is inside of that MOU. And speaking on the Northern Elders Forum on their demand to actually terminate this, I think this comes very rightly said. Nobody has the details on it. It should not be taken lightly, as we've both agreed. But as well, you know, there should be greater legislative oversight when it comes to these sorts of things. This is a huge decision, especially when it comes to sensitive data. It should not just be, you know, accessed by foreign bodies so easily.
Well, the government says this is not going to happen. Although when it comes to such agreements with a more powerful Western country, there's usually that sense that they're never neutral. That at the end of the day, Nigeria, you know, has something to lose. And so that's the sentiment that is being expressed all over the country, you know. And we also have that dimension of the influence of France in West African, in Francophone countries, and Francophone countries, you know, really fighting to sever that relationship with France. And then Nigeria seem to be drawing France closely. We also have the aspect of our president Mr. Bola Tinubu, who has a close relationship with the French President Emmanuel Macron. So people are, looking at everything with side eye and thinking, is this about Bola Tinubu and Macron and France, or is this about Nigeria? So I think the FIRS maybe has more to say on this, because I don't think this is going to die down in the next couple of days.
I think this carries a far-reaching implication for a country like Nigeria. Just recently, we have a very impressive result on our revenue profile in the non-oil revenue profile, and now we are seeing this kind of partnership between Nigeria and France. I think we can't afford to mortgage our financial future, and we can't afford to undermine our fiscal strength as a nation, because this is something that comes with a long-term implication. We've seen France coming with a frantic effort to cut Nigeria different corner pictures of our foreign policy. But when you look at the outcome of France relationship across the West African country, it leaves a lot of question, because it has created a lot of political pressure within that region. So I think that when you are coming up with such a policy, there is a need for a public hearing, so that will carry along the people, the civil society organizations and policymakers, so that we can be in one accord, and we can have the same perspective in handling this kind of issue, because we can't afford to be outsourcing critical issues of governance.
And speaking of carrying the people along, I just wanted to add this one point. Let's not forget the new tax laws that are coming into effect from January 1st.
Few days away.
There is so much confusion as it is. Many people don't know whether they're coming or going. Indeed. Yes, the information is out, but many people still don't understand how they're affected on a daily basis. Indeed. So if you mix that together with this MOU, there's so much confusion where the citizens are.
Full disclosure.
Absolutely, where the citizens are concerned.
Final story in this day, the Dangote chairman, Dangote Group of Companies chairman, Aliko Dangote, and the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority, CEO, Ahmed Farouk, they are on each other's throats. Dangote says he needs to be investigated for allegedly sabotaging the economy. So he says that Farouk Ahmed is undermining local refining capacity by continuing to issue import licenses for petroleum products, and says such discourages domestic investment in refining. He claims Ahmed is living beyond his means, with 4 of his children schooling in Switzerland at a cost of $5 million. And he says he's not calling for his removal, but investigation. That looks dirty. I mean, this is a dirty. He's not calling for his removal, but he's revealing details which might be a problem for him. Dangote doesn't joke with his money and his businesses. So. Here, and that's what we're saying.
This is something that has a strong implication on public trust. For a regulator, the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority are expected to regulate the activities and create a fair playing ground for all investors within that circle. But he's saying that the stance of the NMDPR is undermining local production capacity, because a lot of investment has gone down the drain. A business that started with about $20 billion, and with this partnership with some investors now, we can imagine that should be shooting up to close to $30 billion now. So it definitely, nobody wants such an investment to go down the drain. But there is also the side of the local investors saying that they contribute up to 68% of the country's consumption capacity. So which one do we believe? So I think there is a need for strong and impartial regulatory oversight from the NMDPRA.
Well, we still import petrol to fill the gaps.
So there's deficits.
That is local refiners cannot fill. So, let's look at one more story in Leadership newspaper. The ECOWAS 68th Ordinary Session of the Authority of Heads of State and Government that was held in Abuja. So they expressed concerns about unconstitutional change of power, all that's going on across West Africa. It comes amid escalating political, security, and economic pressures. They deliberated about so many things, and we know what is currently happening across West Africa. So the regional body is at a crossroads, is at a crossroad trying to get itself together. All that has happened is a test on whether, this regional body is able to move ahead in the way that it's supposed to, in terms of being able to show that the responsibilities that are thrown in front of it, so there is security cooperation that has to be talked about. They are discussing it, and it's a survival issue for the entire West African region. There's public anger and economic hardship across the region that's affected regional governments, each country, which is why we're seeing all those coups that are happening. So a lot for these leaders to discuss against the backdrop of what is going on.
I think at the center of that discussion really was the rise in military coups that we're seeing in West Africa. And I think a lot of key decisions were made, and there were a lot of outcomes for that, including a firm rejection of military transition plans, which we've already been kicking against in all the reports that we've been having, and the discussions and the way we've been breaking down what has been happening, for example, in Guinea-Bissau and more recently in Benin Republic. So I think that this was a regional success for ECOWAS, in having these discussions. But what do we do with that information now? What do we put into place? Because I believe they also spoke about increasing some of the soldiers for the special.
About over close to 2,000.
Yes,
standby
exactly.
Force
yes.
With effect from next year. But
so
I think
let's add the international story, because that's connected. The international story we're having today is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger setting up a regional investment bank capitalized at 500 billion CFA francs, or translating to $895 million. So the goal is to fund infrastructure, energy, and agricultural projects using resources from this bank. So approximately 5% of tax revenues from each country will be used to support this bank.
So I think when we look at what the alliance of Sahel states, that's Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, are doing, they seem to be more proactive and very focused in their troubleshooting. Because when you look at the history of ECOWAS, which was created as a sole bloc to address issues of trade and economic integration and development within the region, it looks more like a fraternity of military generals and to protect their regime rather than democratic institution and the task of governance itself. You look at it, they have not really focused on participating and having this. Look at what happened there at the continental level when the three leaders were President Obasanjo, Thabo Mbeki, and Abdulaziz Bouteflika, when they adopted that Africa peer review mechanism in 2002. That was to create a framework to address issues of governance and to look at the performance, to have to establish a performance bond between leaders of the state. But now we'll see that ECOWAS have shown more activeness in preserving regime rather than improving governance, and also taking part in the issues like constitutional process, constitutional amendment process. That would help a lot in deepening democratic institutions across the region.
Yolanda, you have something to say?
Yes, I wanted to say that I feel like this regional investment bank setup is more than just a financial move. I believe that it's showing that there are oneness in their vision. And I like that. I'd like to see where this goes. And I would like to also see more of this with other African countries. I think in the past, that smirk on Dr.
We already,
face.
I don't know, I mean, what is happening is that you are seeing a continued push away from, ECOWAS, the region in its entirety, Western lenders, Western influence, conditional financing. They don't want none of that.
Absolutely.
And
but
so,
really, is it a bad thing?
No, it's not.
As long as it's different, let them.
They have tasted France, and now they know what not to do.
That's a good way to
put it. So the point is that they want self-reliance. It's going to be difficult. It's not easy, because one of the biggest problems that African countries face, including private sector, is financing.
Dependence.
Is finding the funding, to finance projects. And you use the word dependence. Dependence because you have everything that you require to make that money, but it's just that we haven't found a way to do that. So they are trying to say, let's be self-reliant and find another way where the other way we've known for centuries has not worked for us. Well, we'll see how that pans out. Those were your headlines for today.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Constance, for that insightful analysis.